right, welcome back, everybody. Friday episode. Excited to be here. What's going on, Joe?
Oh, beautiful day. Trying to pray the smoke away. Hopefully we don't get any here. But I hope all you in Portland and Oregon, the West generally, are doing okay. Scary stuff with your home being threatened and not having clean air.
Yeah, thinking about everybody out there. Yeah, and even Idaho, too. I have some friends out there right now, and they said it was really smoky, and smoke's starting to hit the East Coast a little bit in the high atmosphere. The sun setting is if anybody's on the East Coast and has seen the sun set in the past few days, it's really interesting. Or like puts a shimmer on the sun or something. I don't know how to describe it. It just looks very different.
Out here, it's been like a super red sunset. It's been really nice. When the smoke is thick. It's been a kind of standard sunset the last couple months, or whenever the smoke went away, that stopped. But yeah, it was really intense for a little while. Yeah, what else is going on? We'll get into what happened yesterday in a little bit, but yeah, I'm just excited to record and be here, talk about stuff. Yeah, Navigating Psychedelics is sold out. It's fantastic. So sorry if you didn't make it in, but I'm really excited about this, and we should be announcing dates pretty soon. I would expect within a week or two we'll have new dates up. So if you want to jump in and save your spot, you'll have a chance.
Yeah, we do have an exciting announcement on a new beta course.
Yeah.
We're going to be co-teaching a class with Lenny Gibson, who's our teacher, breathwork and philosophy, and it's an introduction to philosophy and psychedelics. So I think we're kicking that off October 28th. It's on a Wednesday. It's going to be running for 15 weeks. So we're in the long haul for this. It should be fun. So if you're interested in learning about the history of Western philosophy and how that influences and how psychedelics are all wrapped up in there, check it out. What did we say? Psychedelics.com/welcome. We'll have a
psychedelicstoday.com/welcome, or off our Instagram page, just link in the bio there. Yeah, so /welcome, you'll see the link to the philosophy class, and just sign up, like no obligation, just to get more info, and you'll hear when it's for sale. Yeah, and it's going to be a lot more affordable than you think. So just be ready for that, and very limited spots. I think 20 to 25 will be our max. So stay tuned, and really excited. That was a great conversation this morning with Lenny. I'm happy that we're able to put this together so soon. All it takes is studying with him for ages, and then you can get to that point. Cool. So I guess, other things, like if you want to help us out, you can leave us a small monthly donation at patreon.com/psychedelicstoday, or leave a review on iTunes, your podcast app, or Facebook. Those are all lovely. Or just tell a friend. And we've got other classes up on our website as well, from 8 common mistakes, 8 common psychedelic mistakes, to spiritual emergence or psychosis. Some great free classes there. So check it all out. Love to just help you further your journey. And if you want to give us some feedback, psychedelicstoday email@gmail.com. Assuming the spam filter lets you through, and there are not too many Russian spam bots out there. There's a bunch for some reason. What were you saying, like 10,000 a day or something crazy like that?
It's ridiculous. Maybe this is a good thing to chat about. So if you contact us on our website, there's a good chance we might not get that email. So just email us directly at psychedelicstoday email@gmail.com from your email. Don't try to contact us on that contact form. So I don't know. Yeah, we're getting bombarded by Russian spam bots, and they send us probably X amount of spam every minute. And so before, I was able to catch some of the stuff that Gmail did kind of put in the spam folder, and it was pretty easy to sort through that because we didn't really get that much. But now it's like thousands a day. So it's impossible to really kind of skim through. And so I'm sorry if you have reached out in the past. Yeah, we do sometimes, that stuff does get routed to our spam folder, and now it's just literally impossible to keep up with it. So yeah, just email us directly, psychedelicstoday email@gmail.com.
And we are trying our best. So sorry for the disappointment, but we are. So onward. What psychedelic story should we talk about first here? I'm kind of curious to just bring up the compass thing again.
Yeah.
So Compass Pathways, a week or two ago, we mentioned that they filed paperwork to do their first initial public offering or IPO and be listed on NASDAQ. And some newspapers are speculating they'll be worth 500 million plus.
Yeah.
So $500 million. And they used a certain term in the business article we had to look up, pure play. So it's like they're the first psychedelic pure play company to be listed on NASDAQ, meaning they're not a conglomerate with a gazillion offerings. This will just be
one
psilocybin.
product.
Yeah. And probably just psilocybin for depression for now. Maybe it'll expand in scope, but it's TBD. So it's an interesting thing to see that. Yeah, before I jump into the Peter thing, anything else you thought was interesting in that article, Kyle?
No, just the speculation, that it could be valued at, they're speculating $544 million, probably 14 to 16 bucks a share. And yeah, just interesting that, this might be going on the NASDAQ. So,
right. And valuation's a really interesting thing. It's anywhere from like 3 to 7 years of revenues is typically what they value at. So you could like divide by 5 and say like they're expecting once legal to be able to generate 100 million a year or more, or maybe it's like 3 years out and it'll be 300 million a year. So we don't really know how they did the valuation, but it's a really interesting thing to consider. How does that slice and dice? Because they don't really have a product yet, and they probably won't have a product for a year or two longer that can be sold on the market. Yeah, it's not even a product, right? It's like a product plus service. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And Peter Thiel, noted investor in Compass Pathways, it just came out, I think it was last week, that he spent a whole mess of time with and this is how the article phrased it, quote unquote, leading white nationalists before the 2016 Republican National Convention. So Peter Thiel spent time with those people and had some positive things to say afterwards, which is a little creepy. A lot of these people just want like a homogenous ethno state. They want like, just white Protestants. That's at least what the KKK was into. So I imagine, further others might have that too. So like this this was one meeting, right? Peter Thiel probably meets with 300 people a year, maybe more. So like, how do you couch that?
right.
I don't know. Like perhaps he's sympathetic and, let's watch carefully. But it's hard. It's a really hard balancing act. So like, yes, we want this stuff to come through and be prescribable. Yes, we don't want to support Nazis and white nationalists. So like, what do you do? I don't know. Give money to USONA Institute, maybe, where it's a nonprofit doing similar work. Yeah, I don't know. It's tricky. The mission is to have lots of these things prescribable. Well, that's 1/10 of the mission. It's not all of it. And, we need all hands on deck. So Compass, perhaps figure out how to distance yourself from Peter, maybe make it public, because it's not really great that one of your leading investors spent some time with some white nationalists publicly and had nice things to say. So, maybe give some other people who are investors maybe a little bit of a stage, or, ignore it. I don't know. It's probably going to be fine if you ignore it too, unfortunately, but that's true. So the PR machine that Peter has at his disposal is probably quite powerful. So,
Yep. And then, I don't know. Somebody recently just posted something on Facebook that I saw about the Palantir group, like teaming up with ICE and doing a bunch of stuff for them. I don't know too much about
ages.
Yeah, I don't know too much about that. I know Dave Nichols talks about that pretty often from symposia. But
it's kind of like the technological Eye of Sauron from Lord of the Rings. It's like, how do we get to know as much as possible about these folks before we go in for an arrest?
Mm-hmm.
Or how do we profile hundreds of people using AI and software so it makes our like arrest costs a lot lower? Like investigation and arrest costs are now through. Yeah, I don't know. And ICE is a pretty brutal organization. They're not really doing stuff in a kind-hearted fashion. I wish they would, because I'm paying taxes to allow them to do that. So I wish it was as polite as possible, but it's kind of not really what's happened.
Yeah. And so Peter Thiel is just a huge investor in Palantir, and so this is like kind of the stuff that they focus on, I guess. Yeah, kind of like data software, like collecting data on folks and running
Right.
surveillance. So yeah, I don't know. Just all that stuff's wrapped up makes it kind of weird, you know.
Right.
I didn't do too much research into it. I just saw it and I'm trying to look at some articles now about it quickly, but it
Yeah.
just popped in my head as you were talking about all that.
Yeah, it's tricky. And how yeah, just the fact that people are still locked up in cages and like they're spending money on arresting folks without like dispersing their capacity, like get them home, in a kind enough fashion. It's just tough. It's really brutal. And I wish we could figure that whole thing out a little bit nicer. And
Hmm.
it's just messy that psychedelics are, because it's part of Peter's investment portfolio, is wrapped in the whole thing.
Hmm.
And I'm sure other investors at Compass feel very differently about this situation. They really think it's horrible press for the company that a major player. And so like what is that? That's probably why it took 4 years for this to come out about
Mm,
that.
right.
He's hiding it, on purpose. I guess as he should, but it finally came out. And I think an important thing is it goes to show that this whole privacy thing that a lot of us kind of citizen activists are fighting is hitting the rich folks as well. So, like, they're going to have a really hard time with privacy as drones and surveillance tech really ramps up.
Hmm.
Celebrities getting their home phones hacked and nudes getting leaked, all that kind of stuff. Like, that's, part of it.
It's a little off topic, but have you watched that Netflix documentary yet, Social Dilemma? I kept seeing everybody post on it. They're like, "Oh, watch this! I'm deleting Facebook." So I decided
Susan
to jump on the.
Hess-Leger talked to me about it, and she said I needed to watch it. She made the recent Groff documentary.
Yeah,
I'm into it, but that's in a sense that's something we've known, right? It's just
yeah,
finally there's a nice documentary that's packaged up well.
yeah. If you follow
Um,
this stuff for a while, I mean, most of it I kind of already knew. You know,
yeah,
watching different stuff and just kind of paying attention to it. But yeah, maybe it's new for a lot of people that haven't been following like evolution in tech and what's kind of going on behind the scenes there.
so to perhaps a way to tie this in is intention to psychedelics. Like, what is our intention with using psychedelics? Like, why do you use them? It's okay to have divergent reasons to use them. It's just, perhaps worth knowing why.
Hmm.
It's like, oh, I'm bored. Let's eat this paper. Paper makes brain go burr. Like that's still one of my favorite memes. But how do you contextualize or like apply intention to your internet usage, your social media usage, and understanding the full implications of where you're spending your time and your attention? Because your
Hmm.
attention is the commodity.
Hmm.
You and all of our attention's the commodity, and they're productizing our attention,
Hmm.
packaging it for vendors, and it's at the point where they're able to manipulate big portions of things like elections and all this other stuff. Thankfully, they're allegedly trying to sort that out. We've had a lot of problems with advertising on these platforms lately on account of the election coming up, and yeah, so they're how, why exactly are we doing it? Are we doing it just to find the others? Are we doing it for other reasons? We're selling ourselves by using the platform,
Hmm.
even though it's free. It's still sort of a transaction.
Yep.
So maybe there's other platforms you can use. I don't have a great one. I know Mastodon's like the open source Twitter. There's a few
Hmm.
others, but realistically, it's a tough thing. It's when there's friction to join a new platform and minimal incentive,
Hmm.
it's hard to make people shift. But anyway, let's get back to our news topics. Can you tell us a little bit about Berkeley?
Yeah, let me pull that up really quick. So, UC Berkeley launches a new center for psychedelic science and education. Really exciting. So, there was $1.25 million in seed funding from an anonymous donor. The new UC Berkeley Center for Science of Psychedelics will conduct research using psychedelics to investigate cognition, perception, and emotion and their biological bases in the human brain. Yeah, sounds really cool. And just trying to think how many other kind of psychedelic research centers are there? Johns Hopkins and I guess if you consider Imperial College, they launched one. So I guess within the institution. So it's exciting to see more of these pop up. And let's see, who's the founding members here? Dave Presti, one of the founding members. Also Dacher Keltner, psychologist, and then also Michael Pollan, I guess, is part of the founding members there as well, or co-founders. Interesting to see him on there.
Yeah, right. Like it's nice that he's trying to follow through and maintain a connection, but I hope he's taken some of the criticisms that people have provided to heart a little bit, and we'll see where it goes. Like it's a university project. The funding's a little small. I was kind of surprised at the 1.25 number, but that's probably enough to get a project rolling. There are major, I was talking to some folks recently, there's apparently some major funding gaps, not only in universities nationwide, but in the University of California system. So I hope they're able to maintain, and I hope they're able to like persist through all this. So
Yeah.
see where it goes.
Yeah, one of the interesting things here is their training psychedelic guides. So what do they say here? One unique aspect of the new center is its emphasis on public education. It will produce a website offering rigorously vetted, original, and curated content covering scientific, political, business, and cultural developments in psychedelics. Michael Pollan says the center's plan to explore ways of supporting healthy volunteer research participants as they undergo psychedelic experiences in the center's studies is unique too. To do this, the center plans to collaborate with the Graduate Theological Union, an independent consortium of religious schools and theological institutes based in Berkeley and the larger San Fran Bay Area, in the development of an immersive learning program on psychedelics and spirituality. I find that to be really interesting because this is a critique that Lenny always kind of points out to us, just kind of saying he really thinks some of the big implications are going to be within kind of like the fields of pastoral counseling and spirituality and religion. And, a small slither of psychedelics could really kind of be within psychiatry, right? Because some of these core issues start hitting existential and spiritual issues. And, maybe when we're looking at like certain anxiety and depression, maybe it does have these existential spiritual roots. And so I think this is really interesting to see them team up with, these theological institutes to kind of explore this. I mean, it sounds much different. Everybody's kind of really focused on, traditional psychiatry and psychiatry versus kind of like this religious spiritual framework. So it'd be cool to see how this develops over time.
Yeah. I think it's really important to have multiple religious traditions approaching this from different, avenues. Like, I imagine what a psychedelic Catholic church would look like. It's pretty interesting. I think Tim Leary was going to a lot of Catholic church ceremonies at the end of his days, and it was interesting for him to bring back that kind of psychedelic insight to ritual and church, and perhaps it makes it interesting again. I don't know. Like, I think a lot of folks could do with having some direct experience around psychedelics. But, our conversation the other day, Kyle, keeps coming up to me, like this question of, do we really know what we're doing with psychedelic experiences? Like, do we know like what the implications of these things are? And I think there's a lot left to be known, spiritually or otherwise. It seems to be healthy, but like we haven't really seen it at the billion person scale yet. Like what happens when there's a billion people on psychedelics regularly? It might take a little while, but it seems to be the pharma push to like get everybody in it, not just a select few,
Right. Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I mean, when we look at, different shamanic cultures or just like historically how these substances were used. I mean, ayahuasca has changed over time from the healer just drinking to group work. And there are probably groups that would take psychedelics as a group. But yeah, it's interesting to see how this evolves and what's the implication when kind of everybody jumps on board. Even just thinking about like some of the Greek mystery rites, like the Eleusinian mysteries, right? Like there's only a select people that started going through there. And yeah, what happens when you kind of open it up to the masses? Be interesting. I think. But, kind of like we were talking about, like with somebody, just about like the subtle energy realms, the things that can kind of get exposed. I mean, we were really diving into a lot of transpersonal phenomenon in that conversation we were having, which doesn't, I mean, it gets discussed within, I guess, this field, but also it's kind of on the fringes at times, it seems like, when you start talking about some of that stuff. But I don't know. I think if anybody has been in this world for a bit and has had some of those weird transpersonal, subtle energy realms, however you want to describe it, it's really hard to reduce that, right? And I feel like that's like a lot of psychiatry and psychology does, is try to reduce it to something. I mean, that's just like our the paradigm that we're in. We reduce things, and sometimes it's helpful, but other times, I don't know, some of those experiences have shaken me to the core where I go, I don't really know if I can really make meaning out of that from a Western perspective. That shit was just a little too weird for me to wrap my mind around.
Mm. Hmm. Yeah, a lot of these experiences are going to be really hard to understand. And, like what happens when we start becoming quote unquote aware of all sorts of different kinds of entities in the Rudolf Steiner's term for it was spiritual ecology of, the world and universe. And how, I would say we're going to encounter a lot of really interesting things. Like Stan talks about exorcism, not all the time, but I think he talks about it for a reason. It's an interesting deal. Like in holotropic breathwork, they even mentioned stigmata like once or twice. And I'm like, oh, okay, I forgot about stigmata because it used to be a really interesting topic to me. But it's what happens when these weird phenomena happen, and what do we do? And maybe it's going to be like 1 in a million or 1 in 10,000, but still could happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like, I don't know. Do you call the ambulance when your hands start bleeding in the middle? Like, I don't know. Like, so food for thought. Like weird stuff happens, and just be ready for the weird, I guess. Yeah, be open to it. And perhaps your worldview is not adequate to explain it. And that might be the most challenging part. Like people are so indoctrinated that it's really hard to get flexible. So, yeah.
Yeah. I think I was pushed over the edge to try to find other ways of trying to make sense of it at times, because I would try to figure it out from a Western perspective. And then, I don't know, some shamanic cosmologies just worked a lot better for me. I go, oh, okay, this makes more sense. But we don't live in those types of like worldviews, so it's hard to try to bridge those worlds together, which I think is kind of the exciting part about psychedelics, is that I think it might help foster some sort of new paradigm shift in way of thinking. If we start having a lot more of these experiences, how can we start to change and start to view the world a little bit differently?
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Worldview shifting is so hard. And it's like our worldview is really only a couple hundred years old. It's like kind of post Newtonian worldview. And some of these worldviews have been around a lot longer. Varying worldviews in shamanism, various religious traditions been around for ages that don't include this kind of Newtonian worldview. And I think it's important to say, okay, this has been around for longer. Maybe it's a good fit for me. Like, I don't want to say everybody needs to abandon their scientific worldview. It's just like perhaps some people with extreme experiences might consider expanding it.
Yeah, I don't think we need to abandon, right? And I would even say we could get into dangerous territory with romanticizing old worldviews as well. I think we need to figure out an approach on how do we start to bridge the gap between some of these worldviews, and just to like not be so dismissive, right? Because there's benefit of the Newtonian Cartesian paradigm. We wouldn't have technology, we wouldn't have planes, we wouldn't be doing the things that we're doing right now if we were stuck more in an animistic worldview. But parts of animism can really help explain maybe some of these interesting entity encounters. Might help provide a little bit of comfort if that's the type of worldview. But also, like, I was just talking to a friend last night about he's reading a book on indigenous wisdom, and just the author was talking about. I just downloaded it on Audible, so I'm going to start listening to it. So I'm paraphrasing and probably not getting this 100% because he was just kind of talking to me about it. But just like the difference between some indigenous cultures' view on time versus like our linear view on time, and how in some, those traditions, it's more secular. Maybe there's not like this end goal, right? Time just keeps it's a secular pattern versus this more linear pattern that, it's like, okay, this is how things progress versus, some other sort of worldview on time.
Mm-hmm.
It's really interesting to think about.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so many interesting things. Like I love this concept of Australian Aboriginal dream time. I just think that's such like an interesting concept, and the way they frame it is so beautiful. And for a lot of folks, it could be therapeutic to just kind of even live with that for a few weeks. Like, what happens if you take that on for a month or two? And it could be some interesting stuff. All right, cool. I'm ready to jump to Ann Arbor. So it looks like Ann Arbor, Michigan is considering decriminalizing psychoactive mushrooms, plants, according to the Detroit Metro Times here, metrotimes.com. And that could be really interesting. So it looks like they're going to introduce it to the city council on September 21. And it's part of Decriminalize Nature Ann Arbor. So that's kind of cool. And yeah, I'm excited to see what happens there. It doesn't look clear if they've got like a sample set from asking the city's residents like what the likelihood of passing this is, but it could be good. Yeah, I don't know. Any thoughts on this one?
No, just exciting. More, towns and cities are starting to do this, right? Small local changes, I think, will help ripple out. So, and I don't know, I've never been to Ann Arbor, but I hear really good things about it. So maybe it has a good chance of possibly getting passed.
Yeah, I would hope so. So I read the other day, I don't have a link, but Washington, D.C.'s decriminalized initiative is looking really good. So I think in a poll, it's 3 to every 5 currently. 3 out of 5 are in favor of decriminalizing in D.C., according to some surveys. So we'll see what happens with that. And it could be really cool if they're able to pull it off.
Yeah, I wonder what happened to Chicago. That like resolution never got passed. It was submitted, right? And then it just didn't get to another phase.
I'm not too familiar with that. There's an article here from last October titled Chicago City Council quietly begins push to decriminalize psychedelics. But yeah, I've not really heard too much more about this from them.
Yeah.
Yeah, an article here from February in Chicago, legal pot could be just the beginning. Are mushrooms next? So it sounds like there's a trend here. But yeah, it would be good to know. If anybody knows about Chicago, let us know. Should probably ask Matt Brown.
Yeah, he does live there.
Man on the ground in Chicago for us. So yeah, it's cool. I really have been carefully considering like if I want to run some sort of campaign or help coordinate a campaign here in either my city or at the state level. I personally might push for decriminalization of all drugs, but we would see how it shakes out, right? Well, we don't really know what Oregon is going to do yet, but it would be cool if they're able to pull that off, the Drug Policy Alliance. So time will tell. All right. Next up is this, or anything else before we jump?
No.
Cool. Next
Dr.
up
Bronner's
is
next.
Yeah, a new campaign called Heal the Soul. So, title of the article on their site is "Support Psychedelic-Assisted Therapies to Heal the Soul." It looks like they're funding a whole lot of organizations. So they're helping with this Indigenous Peyote Conservation Initiative, which is extraordinary. River Styx Foundation did a podcast with us a while ago talking about that project. They're helping fiscally support Oregon's Measure 109 to legalize psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy there. Vets, a really interesting group supporting Navy SEAL veterans. Most specifically, I think they're going to branch out eventually. And Heroic Hearts Project and MAPS and the DC initiative. Good Lord. Yeah,
I didn't know
cool.
they were trying to fund all this stuff. It's really awesome. I knew MAPS and measure 109, but I didn't know about all these other things. So that's great. And it sounds like that they're going to be donating 10% of net sales in October. And the, that's going to go to these organizations.
I think I saw on Pierre Bouchard's Instagram this morning that they've updated their labels to talk about psychedelic therapy, like on their packaging. This is a pretty big product. It's sold like everywhere and it's very popular. Like I think even places like Costco, which is like, you can't really get more mainstream than Costco. So, between them and Target, like people are going to be having documentation in their houses around psychedelics.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a really interesting thing. Anderson Cooper does, a good job, I guess, with 60 Minutes. But when people actually have physical products in their shower, where hopefully they're going every day, they can read this stuff.
Yeah, you can check out their label on their website here. Looks pretty, really interesting. So it'll say support psychedelic-assisted therapies to heal the soul, and then heal the soul, pretty big. Help heal PTSD, depression, end-of-life anxiety, and addiction. And then it looks like they break down, these different disorders, what's going on, clinical trials and dramatic results, proper integration and preparation. So it looks like they're doing some education on here too. So this is going to be really cool to see this on shelves everywhere.
Mm.
Do you still have the little bottle that we got at the MAPS conference back in 2017? I think it was kind of like a special edition like this. I forget what it was, a special edition. But I think it was
That's my travel soap. So I actually travel around with that. And it might be in Arizona, not 100%. I think I still do have it though, but it's wearing down. So the label can only last so long, at least 2 years though. So that's good. Yeah. So I'm really just happy to see that Bronner's is stepping it up and doing some interesting stuff there and ramping up their funding. It's excellent. Like I appreciate these companies who kind of say, okay, I'm fine making X. I don't need to have like a $7 million a year income. Like I'm okay at X. And let's just do the rest for social good and the bettering of our workers' lives too. So, it's another reason to get behind it. It's a pretty cool company. Wish they'd give us some sponsor dollars, but I get it. There's a lot of other groups to fund. Yeah. So I guess, Kyle, let's jump into cannabis. You up for that?
Yeah.
Cool. So, we've been hearing about this topic of psychedelic-assisted cannabis sessions for a long time. Daniel McQueen kind of introduced us to the concept, I think. But apparently it's been around for a long time. I just chatted with Ren Butler, the archetypal astrologer who studied under Stan and Rick Tarnas at Esalen. And he was saying his whole game plan is a single cannabis strain at 17% plus potency. And then you lay down, and as soon as you lay down, it's essentially the same protocol as holotropic breathwork. So I was like, oh, cool. So I don't know, like the most psychedelic experiences I've had with cannabis are more just like very intense panic attacks, anxiety attacks, and at times getting like a kind of 3D vision of ideas. Like ideas seem to have more like relief and depth. But I'd say that mainly is it. Sometimes you can get insights into things that weren't necessarily available to your standard mind.
Mm-hmm.
It's a nice, neat thing that can fit into an hour. You don't have to like get stoned for 12 hours, like LSD, you can be like stoned for, 30 minutes or whatever it is. So it's kind of nice. I don't know. Have you done any kind of like sessions where you get like kind of high and lay down for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much how I use it. And I mean, I've been doing this for a while. So when we originally connected with Daniel, I was like already super pumped about it. Cannabis for me has always been psychedelic. And so I don't really find it to be a very weird concept. I've always kind of had very interesting experiences with it early on. And I don't know what that's about. Like I usually am the oddball, like when growing up and having experiences, everybody thought I was, I don't know, maybe not just abnormal in that sense. Cause I would always talk about visions I had, or just like, the panic attacks definitely, I think, exacerbate that at times, but it's always been very psychedelic to me. And so, the way I work with it is like somatically. being able to lie down, incorporate some of the breathing techniques, do movement, do yoga, do some body work, and to really work with whatever's coming up in my body that way. Maybe play some music and and I kind of started developing this naturally over, I don't know, 10 plus years, just from it was like listening to the plant and saying like, this is how I should be used in a sense. Like every time you go do something stupid with me, X might happen. And so I started getting the message of like, use this more consciously. And this is a tool for inner explorations. And so, I mean, not to say that I haven't done a lot of recreational stuff in the past and kind of have it be a social thing. And I think that's a really interesting thing about that medicine. It's like, set and setting is really huge. And sometimes it is a very social plant medicine, and it can work that way. And then there's other times where I want to have a social experience, and then I'm the weirdo that has to go in the other room and do a bunch of breath work and have to work through whatever's coming up for me. Or I'm there just stretching by myself going, I just need to move this energy around.
Right. Well, it's interesting though, right? Like you had some extreme experiences in your youth, and now like they're still there. They've left a mark, and they're, that for other folks, like smoke pot all day long, like nothing really extreme happens. That's just they're maintaining. It's really just interesting. Like I found that when my kind of underlying anxiety was really high from, either working too much or like physically being stressed out or something, it just really amplified it to the point where I'm like having meltdowns, But, as anxiety lowers, like it's like, oh, this is pleasant again. Nice. Cool. So there's so many different applications for cannabis, from like just relaxation to like I was talking to somebody recently about medical cannabis, and like just if people are trained to use it properly for treating disorders, like it can be really amazing. It's not generally, I think most folks kind of giggle about medical cannabis, but it's a real deal. It's not a joke, and it's medical for a reason. You can't really trick regulators. You need to have a real prescription to get it. Yeah, it's just an interesting jam. But yeah, the psychedelic angle, like I remember when Daniel McQueen was talking about it, he's like, yeah, I've been doing this for ages, and you do work with clients, and it works just almost the same as other psychedelics. And that fits into our model that kind of Lenny preaches all the time of these things are their primary effect is largely the same, but secondary, tertiary effects can be different. So there's, some interesting angles that we need to investigate here. And there's people doing group cannabis work. So like alternating sitter breather pairs, or smoker sitter pairs, sorry. And there's people doing one-on-one work, big ritual work, more like everybody smokes except for the staff, stuff like that. So it's an interesting thing, and I hope more people check it out. Have you ever like guided a session with cannabis at all?
No, I mean, I'm other than like friends being around and having like kind of panic attacks and just needing to like work with that. But no, not anything offering a service to somebody.
Yeah. So Daniel McQueen likes to blend tons of different strains together to try to hit all the different major terpenes that we know about. You can kind of like smell, okay, like this thing smells like orange or pineapple or grape, and you can like guess the profiles by that. I talked to Phil Wolf, I think his name is, a friend that runs Cultivating Connections, I guess, or no, it's not right, Cultivating Spirits in Colorado, and he's like developed this whole concept of cannabis sommeliers, essentially. So you can like, oh, these terpenes will make you feel this kind of thing or whatever. So that kind of method, he explained it to me. I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. So I think there's a lot of room for that kind of thing, and I am just impressed by the range of experiences that people report. People talk about DMT-like experiences, MDMA-like experiences, and much more. And the fact that it can fit into an hour, it's not that like hyper compressed DMT 10 minutes, 20 minutes. It's,
Right.
at least you got a full hour. roughly. You could probably even go longer. You could probably go 2.
I was going to say, sometimes my sessions last a lot longer than an hour.
So
Or maybe
yeah.
I'm just hardwired much differently than most people.
Right. And the concept, I guess, is to smoke like 3 to 7 big hits. If you can go more, great. Probably use a water pipe so your throat isn't too thrashed. And see what happens. Like, if cannabis is good for you and legal in your area, I'm not saying go buy some black market stuff and smoke it. If you know the grower, that's a different story, I guess. But try it. Start low. You can never smoke less. Keep that in mind. And if you don't
Always
have proper
start low,
support,
I feel like, yeah, because those, I was actually just listening to a podcast, and one of the people on there were saying, yeah, psychedelics and cannabis are a little bit different. And some of my worst psychedelic trips were on edible cannabis. And I just started laughing. I'm like, yep, sounds about right. Like, some of like my worst type of terrifying experiences were eating an edible that I didn't know the dose and was just in the throes of hell. And, your heart's just pounding. You can't like get out of it. It takes a lot of grounding exercises. And yeah, it affects people much differently. And I actually remember reading that in I think it was like a High Times magazine years and years and years ago. Somebody was saying the same thing. Like, one of the worst trips they had was with edibles. And so, cannabis is no joke. And it's just really interesting that it's sometimes perceived that way because it's legal. It's starting to become legal in many states, whether that's recreational or medical. And, it's just one of these substances and plants that I guess is, people like to recreate with it. But it's just so interesting, the intensity of it at times for some folks. And I mean, sometimes I wonder, like, I do have friends that can just, smoke all day. I'm like, what is that like? I'm like, sometimes I take one hit and I'm like, having visions of things and kind of like, having really deep insights about stuff. Can't really just function. I have to like go do inner work. So yeah, I don't know. It's really interesting, and it feels like that's always been an ally for me. And over the years, it has taught me to try to respect it a lot more because of those really negative, panicky experiences where it's like, yeah, this deserves some respect. So yeah, I try to approach it a little bit differently now.
right. So, one of my big, really big, weird cannabis things was, I think we had an ounce of cannabis. We made like a single tray of brownies out of it. So a single brownie was really, really, really strong. And I think I might have ate half the tray. So
Oh
I
my
don't
God.
really know how to do any kind of calculation because there's no, they didn't do percentages on black market pot back then. So I essentially couldn't move for hours. I was 100% pale. I wasn't panicking interiorly. I was just kind of like, this will end eventually, but this is not the best. Raging college party right on the other side of the door, and I couldn't really get up to go inside. People wanted to call the ambulance for me multiple times. Thankfully, my friends knew not to do that. So didn't have to get a hospital visit in, and slept it off, was fine in the morning. I have a friend who used to work in the cannabis industry here in Breckenridge, and he was on this CNN show, and his quote was, "Yeah, I tried to overdose on pot once, and all I did was go to sleep for 18 hours." What did he eat? It was something like 1,600 milligrams. When you're in the
Jeez.
industry, sometimes you get a lot of weird, expired stuff to destroy. So, he destroyed it by eating all of it, and he was fine, but it was, experience. And this is, hardcore dabbers, like people, essentially freebasing cannabis wax, stuff like that. Their chemistry is going to be different, and their
Yeah.
experience is going to be different as a result too. So, food for thought. So, I ran a cannabis session for some friends yesterday, and we used a strain called strawberry lemonade and lemon kush, and it worked surprisingly well. I was just really shocked at how similar the experience seems to other psychedelic drugs and breathwork even.
What do you mean by
Yeah.
that?
I just didn't expect to see subconscious material come to the foreground like that and be experiential and interactive in a sense. And, you know, just you put on the playlist or whatever you got and let it roll. And, surprising things will come up,
Mm-hmm.
like biographical stuff, possibly transpersonal stuff. And, it's cool that we got to mention it to Lenny and Elizabeth a little bit. And they're like, oh yeah, it's a great application because we're planning to do breath work in a few days. And like, it's a really great application to, have kind of a drug assisted thing. And then a day or 3 days later, 4 days later, have the breath work to maybe help integrate it or at least process that material further.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess like why was that surprising to you when we think about, just breathing and music can really take you on a journey. So I guess like and I think this is like the thing around cannabis, right? We have a weird perception around it.
Well, Benadryl even does it, right? Like people are having mystical experiences on Benadryl in some of the clinical trials. So it's like, why? Yeah. I don't know. It's this cultural baggage around cannabis. Like we think, oh, you smoke at a Grateful Dead show or you watch Cartoon Network late at night while you're smoking pot. You don't think, let me close my eyes with intention and journey with it.
Right.
Like that's not part of our cultural vision of the plant and our relationship to it. Though, why not? Like there's no reason not to. If we can cure or help manage or treat like a lot of these things happening in our psyche with cannabis, like what kind of a miracle is that? So like McQueen's doing it, Innate Path is doing it. There's probably a number of other situations around the country doing it and internationally. Sounds like there's a lot of just ad hoc egalitarian groups doing it just in a horizontal organization type thing. And it's pretty cool. It's really neat. I remember a guy when I was running events in Boston, I forget his name, James maybe. One of his lines to me, he had a lot of ayahuasca experience, was, once a week, it's my ritual to smoke a whole lot of pot in silent darkness and just like be. I was like, that's terrifying, because I was smoking a whole bunch of weed at that point, and it was like, that is intense. Like, I'll gladly go do breath work, but I know the timing and the place. But like, that's a really serious practice to be with yourself with that kind of intensity once a week, every week. Perhaps that's something people can try out and report back. If you're okay smoking pot, you're psychologically fairly well.
Something that I found out, like, because I'm a very like anxious person when it comes to that, and the more I started working with that anxious energy, I realized that there's a lot of psychic material there, and so I think that's what forced me to start working with it in a different way, where it allowed loosening of these structures to help me relax and allow the material to emerge. And then if you're not conscious of the material, for me, it's anxiety. This stuff's starting to emerge in my body. I'm starting to feel different things. And if I'm just like doing, I don't know, normal things, it's like, okay, well, how is this energy moving? It's starting to come up. And if I'm not being conscious with it, it's going to manifest as anxiety. But when I can create that space to consciously work with it, breathe with it, maybe do some body work with it, stretch, I find that it starts to melt away and really deepens the experience. And really, it's a great adjunct for me personally to do a lot of somatic psychic work. But there is that level of like, there's been those times where I'm like, this again. And I maybe wasn't creating that space enough. And then when I would, I'm like, oh, okay. Like I just need to keep creating the space to do this. So yeah, it's interesting. And I'd say it's probably my main, plant teacher to be able to work like that because, it's accessible and exactly. You don't have to dedicate a whole day to it, right? If you do feel the effects for a while, you're able to function. And a couple last month or so, I took a small dose of an edible and went for a walk. Sometimes I like to exercise with it. I don't know, it just like loosens me up and I'm able to like do things a little bit differently. And I think maybe I was listening to some philosophy, but I started to have a psychedelic like experience with it as I was walking and just enjoying the sunset. And I had this like really interesting thought. I was like, yeah, this is why plants should be legal. And I don't they're very interesting scientific tools. And to
That's
be
what you
able
were
to,
saying yesterday. Yeah.
yeah, to be able to consciously create that space to investigate your reality, and by using a plant medicine like that, whether it's
Mm,
cannabis or mushrooms, like it is just so fascinating to try to develop a relationship with the universe through, these other experiences. And for me, that's a scientific quest, to be able to come up with new ideas, to loosen the boundaries a little bit, to be able to see things differently, to get those creative insights. And, maybe listening to some philosophy while I was walking helped with that. But it was just a
totally.
very profound experience to be like, wow, I'm seeing the world in a new way. And this feels like a scientific investigation on the nature of reality at this point in time. And if people started to kind of view it as that, like what type of cool creations would people come up with? And where would we be as a culture if we created this time to kind of go on these inner journeys as a scientific tool? I think it's fascinating.
Reminds me of Thomas Roberts' thesis about like, okay, so you've done critical analysis on Lord of the Rings, doing literature, critical techniques on literature to review it. And what happens if you introduce LSD? What happens if you introduce cannabis? What new insights can you get? Or let's take Groff's perinatal matrices and analyze the story. What do we get there? And what happens when we start critiquing like empire building or like racism or whatever under these different substances? And what kind of new insights can we get? Some also similar to Robert Anton Wilson's kind of reality tunnels. Like you can flip on the Marxist lens, you can flip on the existentialist lens or modern capitalist lenses, just to allow you to get a better picture of what's happening in front of you. Like you're never going to see objective reality, but you can get closer and closer and closer. And the more lenses you use, the better you're going to get. It's like, does a single telescope give you a great idea about a planet? No. But when you have 400, like you're going to have a lot better. And what happens when you throw a satellite out there and you're able to see from outside the atmosphere?
Mm.
Yeah. Like the colorations on Pluto. Like I saw some updated photos of Pluto the other day. Unbelievable.
Mm.
Really trippy colorations. And we didn't really know that until very recently. So, yeah. Food for thought. There's all these tools. There's all sorts of different quests you can take. And I hope people do. I hope people take it seriously. And yeah, at the very least, go listen to some lectures on Plato or Socrates or Descartes while stoned and take a walk. Like that sounds amazing. Probably will do that this weekend.
Yeah, probably definitely played into that experience a little bit. I think I was listening to some James, and maybe that's what kind of
It's inherently trippy.
Yeah, just this idea of like radical empiricism. Like, how do you approach each unique experience as its own? Because right? Typically, what we do is that we're already putting our maybe framework onto an experience, and how do we maybe move away from that and just explore it as it is? And when even thinking about like the psychedelic experience, like what type of like frameworks are we already imposing on the psychedelic experience instead of like trying to really kind of go in there and explore this phenomenon as its own unique phenomenon without some of these frameworks involved. And that's really hard to do, but it's a really interesting thing to try to pursue and to investigate.
So when I was deep in my like right after my undergrad, it was really like probably evangelizing the holotropic worldview a little too much. And some of my friends were still in grad school doing stuff like around birds. And I would talk about how like there's limitations in science and how, we have these outlier events that are super interesting and say really interesting things. But really, when you're doing a research paper and you want to publish, you want like one thing. And, you've got, say you're watching a population of birds like ravens or something, and they have this aberrant behavior. Like, only like 1 in 1,000 ravens do this behavior over here, but it's super interesting. But like, maybe that fits into your paper a little bit, but it's not really the significant thing on account of statistical analysis. Like you want to look at like, okay, what's the majority of the behavior look like? Not the outliers. It's like, what's the majority of the behavior look like in America versus the outlier behavior? Or in psychedelic sessions, like how do we account for this past life stuff? because we're looking at depression. The past life stuff isn't that interesting to the researchers necessarily. It's not going to help their career to talk about it, just given our cultural milieu. And perhaps it would impact them getting published, if they put that weird stuff in there. But the weird stuff happens. And
well, I mean, Groff really explores that, right? Like
Totally.
being able to like resolve different matrices and like, okay, like this past life experience happened and then this perinatal experience happened. And then, somehow this person was able to resolve some of their issues around this thing. And, it's like, yeah, I wonder if you don't really see that in some of the scientific literature. Like, how is depression being treated, right? Is it just this mechanistic point of view of like serotonin receptors and, reduced activity in the default mode network? Or is it some of this other psychic content that's emerging and resolving and being explored? And is that part of the healing mechanism of what psychedelics offer? Like kind of coming back to like what we were chatting about the other day with this person, just these subtle energies, right? It's like maybe there's these like karmic patterns that are inside of us, and being able to like go into that, to resolve it, to explore it, to go into it and on a deeper level, maybe that resolves in some interesting way. And, maybe that's part of it.
I think that's maybe why we like Groff so much, is it's a more compelling and interesting story. Yes, we need the science that people are doing right now. Like, I'm not trying to disparage it. It's just, you read Groff and it's way more interesting because it talks more about approaching the stuff from a depth perspective, not like a statistical behavioral kind of thing. Like, oh, how does he score on this? It's like, well, no, can you go make yourself a sandwich? Can you go back to your family and be happy? Like, can you have nice connections with your family before you die? And, how did each individual case get there? Some of these people he worked with for a long time, and it wasn't a 3-session protocol. Sometimes.
Yeah, right. I was
It was a
reading a
lot more.
session. It was like 70 sessions. I was like, my gosh.
Yeah. Yeah. Treating some really intractable things too. Like, I think they looked pretty heavily at schizophrenia. Ren Butler had a line the other night. Like, I guess they talked about this idea of, I love the pun, cracking the schizophrenic nut. Like, how do we, approach that problem? And it's a really big problem in psychiatry and psychology, and the interventions don't seem great. Like, we've talked to some people diagnosed schizophrenics who present amazingly well, and they've used psychedelics successfully at times. I don't want to say it's good to universalize that, but it's what's going on there. Why can't we look at it? Why is something taboo? Liabilities and insurance companies certainly play a part in that, but
Totally.
these, what is it? Like, it's a really extreme number, like 1 in 100 folks are diagnosed schizophrenic or something crazy like that.
I don't know the numbers off the top
That
of my head.
sounds a little high, but it's variable too. Somehow it's tied in with cat ownership. Could be toxoplasmosis oriented or something. It's like, yeah, it's an interesting thing. And I hope people look at it. Yeah. Ooh, 1.1% of the population of America diagnosed schizophrenic or is approximated to have it. So it's 2.6 million adults in 2014.
I mean, and then if you look at where it's most prevalent in industrial civilization, I mean, places that aren't, quote unquote, like as developed, they have a higher success rate with either maybe adapting to what's going on, and it's not as puts a lot of strain on that person's life. Like maybe they're able to move through it. And again, different worldviews, right? Like if we're viewing this from the medical biological model saying you have a disease and you're going to have that for the rest of your life versus, maybe this is some sort of, psychic phenomenon. This is an initiation. Maybe they're able to move through it in a different way. It's not to say that, I don't believe that this doesn't exist, but, I think there's just different ways of working with it. And working at the residential home that I worked at, I mean, I saw some pretty extreme stuff and I watched some really transformative experiences happen by just being there with people and letting them work through their process. And, watching people go from extremely paranoid, not sleeping, and, making threats and just having a lot of delusional thinking to becoming fully functional, moving out, getting an apartment and working. So, what's going on there? And I think for the folks that, you're able to catch this maybe early on to be able to work through it. I mean, I think it's a lot harder to treat down the line when it's just kind of progressed and maybe somebody's been medicated for years and years and years. I mean, it's a lot harder to work with, but there might be a different way to work with this early on, if we change the narrative around it a little bit, or maybe not even change it, just be able to approach it in different ways. It's a whole thing me and Michelle Hobart really tried to talk about with spiritual emergence and that whole thing. It's like, maybe there are different ways to look at this.
I don't know if I brought it up in the class before, but there is some really interesting stuff about treatment, differences in treatment for schizophrenia across the world, and how a lot of developing nations, third nations, go about this is they'll put the folks on the traditional meds, but only for a short period of time, and it's more about adjusting them, the sufferers, to, I think, be in their society in a different way, like be more included and be held. And they're only on the drugs for a short period of time, not their whole lives.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like the outcomes are much better than what we have here. So, really interesting. And it kind of just furthers your point. Like, there's so much diversity in how we could be acting here. Like, maybe we only need meds for a little bit.
Yeah, there are a lot of like research in the open dialogue type of approach. I know the psychiatrist that worked with us was really into that. And sometimes when we did include the family system in there and really did a lot of education, like saw some really interesting things happen. So, right. And I don't know, I guess I kind of come back to like narrative a lot. It's like, if you're telling somebody that they are sick and broken, what are they going to think about that they're never going to be able to heal? And is there power in narrative? If you have a more hopeful narrative, can people heal, right? I mean, I'm just thinking about like even in breathwork experiences where I've visited narratives that are so embedded in me, and then kind of going through a breathwork session and be like, holy shit, like maybe I don't need to actually subscribe to that narrative anymore. Maybe that's something I've been holding on to for so long. And maybe I do have the internal power to change, but most people just say, no, like that's what it is. And, that's going to be your lifelong sentence. And it's like, maybe not. How do we encourage people that they can change? And when we think about neuroscience and neuroplasticity, like the brain's always evolving. And I think, that's the exciting part about, some of this research in the neuroscience is saying, yeah, actually the brain keeps changing. You can create new neural pathways and evolve. And is it, a lifelong sentence at times with some of this stuff?
Yeah, it's a big deal. So a lot of food to think about there, a lot of thoughts, and I hope it was interesting and helpful. I'm pretty good to wrap. You, Kyle?
Yeah, we're over an hour.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, thank you all for listening. If you want to support us, again, check out some of our free classes at psychedelic-education-center.com. There's also some great paid stuff there. If you want to leave us a small monthly donation at patreon.com/psychedelics today, that would be super helpful. And just tell your friends about the show.
Yeah, and I would also say if there's any like interesting topics that you want to hear us explore on these Friday episodes, let us know. It's fun to run through news, but it's also fun to explore some of this other stuff, like talking about cannabis and conscious ways of working with it and all that stuff. So yeah, reach out to us. Besides on the WordPress page.
Psychedelics Today, email at gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you're thinking about what we've been up to, what you might want to hear us address. And I've been thinking about a Q&A format maybe for some Fridays.
Yeah,
so maybe we'll like set something up so you guys can submit questions and we can try to tackle them. I think it would be really fun and interesting. Cool. So again, psychedelic-education-center.com for some free classes. Join up on our email list at psychedelicstoday.com and maybe check out some of our merch. We got some dope t-shirts at psychedelicstodayshop.com. T-shirts and more. I might start trying to spin up some new sweatshirts on account of it being winter time here, essentially. So
that'd be awesome.
I think I've had that last one for 3 years now. So time to upgrade. All right. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in, and Joe and Kyle signing off for Psychedelics Today. We'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.
Take care.